I guess let's just get started. I guess a couple disclaimers first. If you've walked in here, saw my title slide, and you're like, what? Yeah, it is the Automate All the Things talk. I sort of changed the title a while ago and just didn't really communicate that. So yes, you're in the Automate All the Things presentation. And while we are at the PowerShell Summit, there's not really any PowerShell in this. There's actually not any code or demos or really anything technical. This is a concept sort of how you maybe solve problems while you are figuring out what PowerShell to write, when to write it, if you should write it. So if that's still cool and you're interested in that and you're not running away for snacks, let's get started. So, hi, I'm Chris Hunt. I'm an SRE at Stack Overflow. If you're really interested in that particular subject, I'm here all week, so you can come find me and talk to me. Why are you here? Hopefully, you're here to hear some of my story, the good, the bad, of my experiences managing SRE projects at Stack Overflow for Enterprise. And along the way, we'll kind of go over an introduction to Wardley Maps, how I use them in my project planning, how you might use them to ask questions and communicate answers. And hopefully everybody walks out of here with some information and some knowledge that might help you shape the future of your organization and delight in solving real problems. Okay, so some background context, I guess. You might not be aware, but Stack Overflow, the site you know and love, offers a private version of the same Q&A software for your company's knowledge sharing. It's called Stack Overflow for Enterprise. Like the Stack Overflow you know, but it's private for the questions that don't really make sense for hosting on the public Stack Overflow site. Things about how your company operates, things about how your IP. You can run it for yourself, or we can run it for you. And for those customers that choose to have us run it for them, we do it in Azure. And those customers get, from top to bottom, their own separate infrastructure. So their own load balancer all the way back to their own SQL Server. The SRE team at Stack is organized into a few smaller teams. We call them V teams. They're responsible for sort of different strategic areas of our team. Some of the teams are networking and infrastructure, applications, and databases. And I'm the team lead for the enterprise team. And because Enterprise has a pretty significant investment in Azure, we have a pretty decent sized footprint. We're also kind of the de facto cloud team. So when people are looking at maybe moving a service into the cloud, they tend to come to us. If that sounds cool to you, we are hiring. So, come talk to me if you think you might want to do that. And then going back a little bit further, so Stack Overflow just celebrated their 10th anniversary. And some of you in here might not even be old enough to remember what it was like to ask questions on forums before Stack Overflow. It was darkness and chaos and mostly no answers. So over the past 10 years, they've been building this software for a particular problem. They've been building it a particular way. And now Stack Overflow has launched a few new products. So we're doing things a little bit differently now. We're trying to do things a little bit differently now. We are looking at new tools. We're trying to learn new skills, and probably also, unfortunately, for the first time, security has become a first-class citizen at Stack Overflow. Historically, you could just go download the Stack Overflow database and do whatever you want with it. Our customers don't really like that, the enterprise customers. So like I said, every customer gets their own infrastructure. So we do like multi-tenancy through duplication, which is great for them, but it means lots more work for us. And it means, in general, we have probably more work than we have people on the team to do it. And that's probably not unique to us either. I suspect you guys probably have some similar issues like that. So that's why we're here. So as an illustration, about 2 months into me joining the company and taking over the enterprise team, we sat down for our first quarterly work budget meeting. So every 3 months we get together and we try and figure out what we plan to do for the next 3 months. It's not set in stone, but just trying to figure out where we're going, at least for the next quarter. So our project manager organizes all the work for enterprise, devs, test, SRE team. She kind of keeps us on track. And at the end of the first quarter planning meeting, things didn't look good. So for reference, available days here, available work days, this was based on just 2 full-time engineers back then. And that's, we're splitting time doing on-call. Our policy is when you're on call, you're just doing toil work. You're not doing proactive project work. So it's like if you get a ticket, you get an alarm, don't just make it go away, but actually like try and fix the root cause. So that's time we're not working on projects. Obviously, we take vacation. So that's time somebody's not working on a project. Sometimes we pair on things. So like 2 engineers maybe working on the same project, and all added up, that gave us about 89 days of time in the quarter to work on projects. Yeah, but we had more projects than that. So we had more time, or more scheduled work than, well, we had time to do. And also, like, who here has actually finished a project in the amount of time you estimated? So it's probably going to be even worse than that. So we had 100 hours of proposed work, 89 hours of available work. What were we going to do? So the obvious answer, take some stuff off the list. That's kind of the simple answer, but the hard answer is, what do we take off the list? How do we prioritize things? Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to go about this, or so I've been told. There's lots of project management books, product development books, a lot of acronyms for how to solve this problem. I'm not a professional project planner, so I'm not going to get into that. You're welcome to do some research. So let's talk about a little bit about what I did. Like I said, I was at the company for a couple months, and I'm trying to get my head around like this infrastructure. I barely even know how it works, let alone like what we're supposed to do over the next 3 months or a year on how to make it better. Like, what was the current state of things? What was really not working well? All that stuff. So I, didn't really know. And at first, I just tried like writing it down. Like, okay, here's where we're at. Here's where we plan to go next quarter. And it's going to take this long. But kind of words are hard, and they don't really work for like exploring and learning. Like, when you actually have the answer, write it down. But before then, it's not really a good way to explore a new idea. So I moved on to something else. And I tried to use like a magic quadrant visualization. So like up here was all the cool stuff that worked great, and then down here was all the crappy stuff that didn't work very well. But I was looking at that, and I couldn't really figure out like, what does that mean? Like, the stuff that's down here that we don't want to touch, like, what do we do with that? Does it add any value if we make it better, or is it just kind of like something we need to throw in the trash can? I don't know. So I was thinking about this, and then I remember reading about Wardley Maps. So Wardley Maps offer a couple extra features that really seem to, well, resonate in my head. So one of the things they do, besides like above magic quadrants, is they show relationships, and we'll get into that. One of the other things that they can be used for is to show like the change of a system over time. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of like what I'm trying to do. So let's look into that. But before we get into that, let's talk about maps in general. So this is a map of my hometown, obviously from a certain vantage point. This is also a map of my hometown, and I say town because like there's basically nothing there. But it's roughly centered in the same spot as the other map. It's, it's a different scale, it has different symbols, has a different use case, like one returning from a trip around the moon, the other one for finding your way to target. Okay, so maps have different uses. Here's another map. Again, this is basically the same spot around my house, but this is from the Third Battle of Winchester on September 19th, 1864. And it's these type of like historical military battle maps that were some of the inspiration for Simon Wardley when he was creating basically a new way to map strategy. He wanted a way to understand how to like build the strategy of a company, logically and scientifically, and not just based on gut, which apparently, based on his description, is how most CEOs operate their business. So, anyway, so he was looking for inspiration to come up with this new kind of visualization, or I don't know if he knew it was a visualization back then, but he picked up a couple copies of The Art of War, different translations. And one of the translations in particular, Sun Tzu described 5 important factors that govern like any competition between opponents. And their purpose, landscape, climate, doctrine, and leadership. And he realized none of the tools he's been exploring or had been taught in school or anything cover all 5 of these. So he set about trying to find a way to actually build a system to do that. So a little side note also, one of the other sort of influences he had when coming up with this was he had read a story about the Battle of Ball's Bluff. And it's not a particularly like well-known battle. It's probably not one you've learned in school. But as you can see, I grew up like right next to it. I could walk to it. I'm really familiar with the area and the terrain. But without any understanding of this landscape, early in the Civil War, the Union tried to cross the Potomac and found themselves in front of a 300-foot cliff where they were discovered by Confederate soldiers and assaulted from higher terrain. And this is basically like your worst case scenario for infantry. You have a giant wall in front of you. You have a large, fast-moving river behind you. There's just nowhere to go. So the inevitable conclusion of that is bodies of Union soldiers were floating down the Potomac for several days past Washington, D.C. And that got the attention of the president and Congress and really influenced the way that the Union set up their military going forward. So no longer could you just be a general because you had good connections, had a good family. You actually had to know something about like military strategy. Go figure. So to Simon Wardley, this drove the point that you really need a map of your landscape to understand where you're going, make strategic decisions. Or you just end up in not a good place. So this is another part of the same map, different part of the Battle of Winchester. And I mean, I find these like really interesting myself as well. There's so much information, there's so much context in these. Like you can see where the troops are, what types of troops there are, their position. Very important, like their relationship to each other, because when you're fighting each other, how close you are is really important. You can see the terrain, you can see impediments that would slow down movement. So a ton of information, a lot of context. So that's kind of something he was trying to solve in like just business operations and strategy. So this is a quote from Simon. Says, well, it says that. Remember, not all maps are great, but they can still be useful. So remember that a map is not intended to be like a perfect representation of reality. So like a one-to-one map of the United States would be the United States, and that wouldn't be very functional. You couldn't fit it in your pocket and use it. So just a disclaimer, if you're working on maps, you're not trying to make perfect fidelity, okay? So you're gonna find a kind of a happy medium of what information is useful to you and the people you're trying to communicate for. All right, so the moment you've been waiting for, a Wardley map. This is a really simple example. You can see has a vertical axis listed as value chain. It's got this horizontal axis with these 4 sections, typically called like phases of evolution. And you can even see in this simple example, it's showing some change over time. So you can see kind of the past, present, and future of this system. Okay, so this is breaking down the horizontal, the phases of evolution. It's not meant to measure like bad to good. This is a level of maturity. So things typically start on the left and move to the right. They just evolve over time. Genesis is where things are new, they're unrefined, they're uncharted, experimental. Services in this phase are usually kind of time-consuming to maintain. Their outcome can be unpredictable, but this is also a good phase for learning because things are usually there's minimal investment, maybe there's smaller expectation of success. And then as you move right, we move towards commodity where things are just standardized, they're high volume operations, they're just, you kind of take it for granted, you don't think about it every day. So I will make a practical example if you're thinking about this from kind of a PowerShell perspective. If you start in Genesis, you might have like a one-liner script that you run every time you get a request for some Active Directory change or something. And every time you do it, you're like, oh, what was that command again? I have to go look it up. So it's kind of time-consuming. You're not documenting it, and you have to look it up every time. And maybe you kind of screw it up sometimes. But then you maybe move to custom, where you've identified some patterns, some common behavior or common requests, and maybe you create a module. So now you've got like parameter validation or something, and you can run multiple requests, at once through a loop or something. And then say you want to take that a little bit further. Now you want to productize it, so you add some tests. So you actually validate it works. Maybe you add some documentation, you open source it, and now other people can start using it and working on it, contributing it. Or maybe you're like, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to go buy something off the shelf because somebody's already solved this problem for me. I don't really want to build and maintain my own Active Directory, operations module. And then maybe you just outsource Active Directory management altogether to maybe another team or another department, and you're just like, I don't care, it works. And when it doesn't work, it's not my problem. You just kind of, something you come in day to day and it's doing its job for you. So there's several adjectives up here. They're not super important. Again, really the main thing here is that there's kind of 4 distinct phases, and they all have fairly obvious barriers to get to the next phase. Now the vertical axis here, it's commonly labeled as value chain. There's actually another kind of mapping called value chain mapping. If you want to look into that, super cool, but not really important here. The vertical axis really is used in Wardley maps just to give some spatial relationships. Otherwise, it would just be flat and a little bit harder to read. So this is just a way to show there's a relationship from the customer all the way down to compute. So at the top, the customer, this is called the anchor. This is the sort of the compass rose that points to north. This is where everything on this particular map is related to. So it's not every viewpoint. We're not talking about, SRE in this case. This is from the viewpoint of the customer. You could put multiple anchors on a map, but I find that gets a little bit confusing to have multiple viewpoints on a map. So you can, but I'd just say stick to one anchor and just make different maps if you need to. So I put up some reference symbols. You don't need to use all of them. I use like very few of these. My maps are fairly pretty simple, but just so you know, there's a lot of tools you can dip into when you're trying to build these maps to communicate with your team or just understand how your systems are laid out. All right, so cool. This is the first map I tried to create. Well, the first map I did create. Well, that's not true. I created a bunch of maps that were rubbish, and then this is the first map that I thought was good enough to actually talk about. It's the first map I'm showing you. So in this case, you can see I used operations, basically our SRE team as the anchor. So this is from our viewpoint. I'm not talking about, this isn't from the customer's viewpoint. This isn't, a product-related map or anything like this. This is like stuff that affects me and my day-to-day, and how am I going to make work better for our team. On this map, red stuff is like new stuff we're planning on changing or creating. Most of it's in Genesis because it's new. And I was working on this like the week of our product planning. So I didn't finish it before, but I finished it in time to actually use it to make some important decisions. So we ended up about 11 hours, over budget, assuming everything went great. And our project manager took a stab at, taking something off the list just to help us out. Based on just the list of things we had to do and the little short descriptions we had come up for everything, what she thought she'd take off the list. And she was going to take off configuration management. It was a pretty good sized project. We estimated, I think, 20 days. So removing it would have gotten us under budget, and we could have just gone on our merry way. But she didn't really understand sort of the context of that decision. And honestly, before building this map, I probably would have agreed with her because it was a big, scary project, and there were easier things I could have just, got it started on. But you can see configuration management up here, kind of 2/3 up on the left. It's like connected to half the things that we were maintaining. So we could have invested in some other things, but they probably wouldn't have been able to, they wouldn't have generated nearly as much value as us just making the effort to stand up configuration management. Also, if you're still on the fence about configuration management, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to have the same situation. It touches everything and makes everything better. So after showing this to our PM, she was like, yeah, I agree with you. Let's go ahead and set up Puppet.
So real quick,
yeah.
It kind of seems like your monitoring has almost the same amount of impact, and if you were to take that off, it would touch just about as much too. Is that
This monitoring right here?
Yeah.
So see the red lines? So this is the important thing about Wardley Maps versus like a Magic Quadrant. This is showing relationships, not specifically that it's in Genesis, but configuration management touched how we set up new customers. It touched how we provision infrastructure, auditing, secret management, software deployment, had some dependencies on artifacts. This is just like Windows service monitoring. We were just had a particular service that wasn't starting up. So
you're not saying that all of those things up the chain depend on it. It's just
it's a relationship. Yeah, it's not.
All right.
That is a bit of context you just have to be aware of. You could probably show that a little bit with some arrows or something. And I think there are actually some other visualization aids that kind of help you show that as well. But like I said, the red stuff, that's the new stuff. So we were looking to add that kind of like, this lifts all of these other pieces. And so this is the map I made after that first quarter. And to us, this was a pretty good justification that the priorities we set worked out. We moved almost everything out of Genesis, and we kind of shifted everything to the right, which for us meant we were getting better at it. It was taking up less time, and it also freed up more time for us to try new experiments, because that's Genesis is really good at, you're creating your new thing, trying it out. Maybe you don't tell everybody to go use it that first time or anything. You just fly under the radar a little bit. So this is actually a quote I grabbed from Slack like a while ago. Your picture's next to it, you said it. So Brandon Olin, AKA Dev Black Ops, the creator of Poshbot and maintainer of some other really great PS tools you may have learned about earlier today. He's also the newest member of our team. Wrote this a while ago, and he probably forgot, but it was a really good illustration of that conversation that we kind of have as operations engineers. Like, I can build this thing and it'll solve our problem, but then I have to maintain it and maybe make it better, or just deal with the fact that it's awful and it's just always going to be time consuming. So as you're moving things from Genesis towards commodity, there's effort involved in that. It's not just, it doesn't happen over time magically. In fact, I think over time, things will move towards Genesis. As the rest of technology moves forward, you get your technical debt, and it goes back to being rubbish, even if it was awesome at one point. So, keep that in mind. When you start something, you're going to have to make an investment, and you're either going to have to make an investment to maintain that or move it forward, or you have to make an investment to replace it with something that you can get from somewhere else. It's another good Simon quote, sort of similar to the other one. You can't have a perfect map, but reality can cope with that, so can we. It's okay. You don't have to have a perfect map. You just have to have one that works for you. So, in summary, you're really trying to communicate the context of a system. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you're trying to basically figure out where you are, where you want to go, and you can share that with other people, and you guys can have a conversation. Really, the conversation about creating these is much more valuable than the actual map itself. Like the little disagreements of, I think we're here, and no, I think it's here. That's when you really find out the state of your system. So in my experience, focus on a particular anchor. Don't try and create the map of the whole universe. Just kind of pick a point of view that you're trying to learn and discuss about. Customers, easy, your role, pick something and work from there. Don't over-focus. Again, you don't have to be the Google Earth of your organization. You just have to have enough fidelity that you're getting the point across. And if you have multiple stories, make multiple maps. That's every dot on that could just be another link to another map. So you can, if you really want to, you could take it even deeper. I guess you could technically make a Google Earth if you really wanted to get into it. So that's all I've got really for content. There's a whole bunch of really good content. This first one, Wardley Maps on Medium, that's actually basically a book that Simon Wardley wrote. I think somebody converted it to PDF, and it was like 270 pages. It's free, it's online, it's Creative Commons. So like, you know, you're not going to start working on these and somebody's going to come knocking and say, no, you can't use this, you can't talk about it. Oracle can't buy it and mess it up. It's in the community for life. There's a couple other good things. I'll post the links to these. We'll go on the Summit links page soon, so you don't have to memorize all this. Again, you know, you can follow Simon Wardley on Twitter. He's actually very entertaining. He tells it like it is to everybody, so he doesn't really care. So when I also did my maps originally, I was using Google Drawing. That's not a great option. Fortunately, now there are a couple tools, wardleymaps.com and online Wardley Maps. One's kind of like a point and click, and the other one actually has a really interesting sort of markup language so that you can copy that and put it in Git and kind of create an artifact, which we all like doing that. Also today, Stack Overflow just launched a new product. So our private Q&A offering now increased. We have 3 offerings. The new one now is Business, which offers single sign-on and some really cool features. So go check it out. And that's what I got. So any questions?
What should be on a map?
Well, no, that's the hard part. Right. So the question is, how do you decide what should be on the map? That you just have to try over and over again. I assume like when people were learning to map the world, they had the same thing. We're like, yeah, we should probably include water. We should probably include things that'll kill you. But you know, like I said, with these conversations you're having, you kind of know, like, what are your pain points? What are the things that are slowing you down? What are the things that you don't think about? Those are kind of the hard ones, I guess. Like, what do you take for granted? What if, like, Azure just like, you know, 10 billion a year, we're not really interested in this model anymore. It's going to go away. What do you have to make up for? So no, I don't have a good answer for that. And that every time I do a map, that is the most challenging thing, is what to include. Because there isn't a rule. There's not like a guideline. It could be a server. It could be like a physical server that's just causing you problems. It could be a process. You could have processes and servers and people, and it could all be on there because there's relationships between them all. So, well, okay, so the question is, what was the response from your team? I will say the response from our team was, ooh, ah. I'm not going to say that's going to be the response from your team. We do kind of have some nerdy people over at Stack Overflow, and they like cool things, nerdy things like this. But it was a good communication tool for our project manager. So she doesn't understand all this technical stuff, but you can look at the picture and see like, oh, yeah, this is all connected. I don't need to understand why. I don't need to understand like how Puppet manipulates these things, but I can see this thing is reaching out to all of this. So it makes sense from a project manager perspective to prioritize that. And like I said, I didn't even know, like you have a feeling, we all like make a lot of gut decisions, but they're not necessarily good ones. So making the effort to just put it down on paper and talk about it probably brings a lot to light. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.